بین جنبش سبز مردم ایران و نهضت آزادی‌های مدنی در امریکا شباهت‌های بسیاری وجود داره. در این نقطه حساس جنبش سبز چه درس‌هایی رو میتونه از نهضت آزادی‌های مدنی امریکا بیاموزه؟ سلام، من حمید دباشی هستم و این برنامه شما هفته سبز. با سلام مجدد. میهمان این برنامه ما آقای دکتر کورنل وست، یکی از برجسته‌ترین فلاسفه، فعالین سیاسی و نیز عضو سوسیالیست های دموکرات امریکا هستند که در ضمن در دانشگاه پرینستون فلسفه تدریس میکنن. Dr. West, thanks for joining us. As you know, we are considering the Green Movement in Iran as something very similar to the American Civil Rights Movement. What do you think was the secret of the success of the American Civil Rights Movement that sustained its course and extended it all the way from the middle of the 20th century to the first decade of the 21st century, when we finally had the first African American elected as the President of the United States?
I think the fundamental secret of the Civil Rights Movement was that it was a long revolution with a fundamental commitment to unarmed truth and unconditional love. And by unarmed truth, I mean the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. So it could be in American apartheid in the South. It could be in Iran, that you actually have courageous and visionary, determined brothers and sisters, be they black or be they Iranian, who are willing to allow suffering to speak, willing to lift their voices, and to do it rooted in a profound love for their people. The Martin Luther King Jr. had a love affair with poor people and black people. The Iranians have a love affair with the Iranian people. And that love takes the form of justice. We understand justice is what love looks like in public. So when you really love people, you hate the fact they're being treated unjustly. You loathe the fact they're being treated unfairly. And you must do something. You must bear witness. And it's to coming together, to organizing, to mobilizing. But sometimes it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. Sometimes there's defeat and then breakthrough. Sometimes there's progress. Sometimes there's regress. It's the history of the Civil Rights Movement in America, history of the Green Revolution. And let me say this, that the Green Revolution is the most significant and exemplary movement for justice in the world today, because it's in a part of the world where both reform and transformation is necessary, but rooted in a nonviolent movement tied to love and justice cannot but send tremendous effects and consequences for those of us in the American empire.
How can a nonviolent civil rights movement sustain its course against a violent regime that does not hesitate from any cruelty? What are the enduring lessons of Martin Luther King and American civil rights movement in this respect?
Yeah, first I just want to say to my dear Iranian brothers and sisters that Martin Luther King Jr. is smiling from the grave. Gandhi is smiling from the grave. Why? Because any nonviolent movement rooted in spiritual discipline, moral courage, political vision, attempts to break the vicious cycle that goes back to the very beginning of Homo sapiens, which is violence, domination, subjugation, revenge, bigotry, and hatred. And in the place of it is justice, not revenge. Deep love, even if you're willing to sacrifice and die for that love, not hatred and bigotry. But to break the cycle, and we understand that each attempt to break the cycle can solicit brutality, can solicit barbaric response from the powers that be. That we saw that in the South when Bull O'Connor and himself, who was a Sunday school teacher, who was willing to actually crush precious young black people as well as older black people. The regime in Iran today, willing to crush precious Iranians who are willing to bear witness to love and justice and truth. So I think that one can be discouraged, but one should never in any way be paralyzed by despair. You know, Martin Luther King Jr., each time he would lead a youth section, he would begin with one sentence. He would say, "Do you have your cemetery uniform on?" which is, do you love the people enough to be willing to live and die for them? You see, that's a deep question. And I think the Green Movement has shown us that this rich legacy of a nonviolent resistance movement in the face of a brutal and barbaric regime, you have enough people who are willing to actually bear witness and live and die. I mean, there's nothing more moving than that. See, as a Christian, of course, I speak what Jesus says, no greater love does a man or a woman have than the willingness to lay down their life for your friend, for your comrade, for your babies, for your children, for a better future.
Now, I'd like you to imagine yourself that you were in Iran and advising the leaders of the Green Movement. How would you chart its course over the next year, given the brutal repression of the regime?
I think I would want to highlight three different fronts. The first front would be the Iranian people themselves, that to be proud of this group of citizens who are willing to risk their all, life and limb, in order to make Iran free and democratic. And one can never downplay the weight, the gravity of that kind of service and sacrifice for the future of Iran. So you want to be able to keep them motivated. The second front would be to try to make some connection with those on the inside of the system, to convince a small slice that they need to have a receptivity. They need to be able to respond to this organized movement, this sacrifice and service, so that it creates some wiggle room on the inside of the system. I think Martin Luther King Jr. understood this as well. You have to have some folk on the inside who are so touched by the willingness of Iranian brothers and sisters to sacrifice that they begin some energy that creates some space on the inside. My third front would be the international front. Now, here we are in the United States, myself, of course, here in the American empire. We have a very precious American democratic experiment in the United States, but we also have an imperial system. So there's tension between the two. And we need more voices to speak publicly, passionately, about the Green Movement in the United States, so that the media begins to cast a limelight on it. And a limelight on it in such a way, not that it reinforces the demonizing of Iran, because it's easy for the mass media and the corporate media in the United States to cast it as just either or. No, the Green Movement actually is it's a new wave. It's a new wave. It's a new way of engaging in political movement in Iran and in many ways in the Muslim world, and it's magnificent. I teach Mahmoud Mohammed Taha, who I consider a Muslim Gandhi in a certain sense. He was killed in Sudan in 1984. But he has the same kind of vision. How do you create a new wave in which freedom and democracy, not by imitating the West, but being indigenous to the Middle East, but learning from the West? Because believe me, the Green Movement has much to teach us in the United States, just as the Green Movement can learn from the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. But I think this international front in America, in Europe, in Latin America, and other parts of Asia, in the Middle East, in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip. You see, if we could see King's legacy taking root against Israeli occupation, so it doesn't lose sight of the humanity of Israeli brothers and sisters and Jewish brothers and sisters, but it lets them know that nonviolent resistance can, in fact, create a fundamental transformation of even an occupied people into a free people.
Now, as you know, economic justice is at the heart of any civil rights movement. Iranian workers have just marked May 1st, Labor Day, despite severe state repression. How do you think the relationship between a civil rights movement and a labor movement can be combined in future?
I think there's two elements to it. One is that there is this fundamental commitment to poor people. And see, as a Christian, I would say loving poor people. I would want the Iranian people to love poor Iranians and love working class Iranians as much as they love their TV stars. Because we tend to have love affairs with our celebrities, you see. Now, what does that mean? That means then that when you look at Iranian society, you want to look at it through the lens of poor and working people. Because there's class struggles going on in every society that we know. And if we're actually going to embrace everyone, echoes of the 25th chapter of Matthew, what you've done to the least of these, you've done to me. The prisoner, the orphan, the widow, the fatherless, the motherless, the oppressed, the poor, the working people. Then your social analysis comes in and says, well, let's look at how elites actually behave in Iranian society. Who is this Revolutionary Guard? What kind of bureaucratic status do they have? What kind of privileges do they have? How does that relate to the precious, priceless, poor Iranian brothers and sisters, working class Iranian brothers and sisters? How do